Well now, what are we to think of this kind of phenomenon? People claiming to see things such as I did. There were 38 of us, and we all believe that we saw it, but of course we don't expect other people to believe us if they don't want to. Can you imagine what it's like to look up in the sky, sparkling all around, and some figures up there, walking about on top?
Dozens of children said that one or more of the disc-shaped objects landed just beyond the far edge of their playground. The next thing they knew, something was standing next to it.
We saw him standing by the silver thing, and he had big eyes.
The UFO phenomenon didn't really start in 1947. We have many sightings from during the war, before the war, in the 19th century, and going back as far as we have records. And
it splits into two identical objects, which have different radar signatures. We questioned at first the source. We actually took a look at the radar. We confirmed it matched all of the telemetry that you see on the actual screen. We ruled out fakery. Everything about it was accurate, and there's no birds that fly the speed. They don't split into two.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Hence Corona, Mexico. We have with us this afternoon Mr. Lonnie Zamora. You couldn't identify them as actually being a human being as you and I are.
No, sir.
Were they two of them?
I would say there were two because one was in front and the other option was in back.
Imprints of the legs of the craft, and it was four of them. Then we saw this footprints around there.
An arrogance in the scientific community. No, don't bother me with a phenomenon that doesn't fit.
Oh, it's getting close. Splash, splash, splash. Mark bearing and range.
Let's see it. Got it.
I had a boyfriend, his name was and we'd been going together for a while. And he lived on one side of town, I lived on the other side of town.
Where were you living, by the way?
Meridian. Yes, and I lived down on Highway 493. And generally you'd go into town and then go out on 19 to go to his house. Well, they came up with this little dirt road that you could go, you know, the town kept building up, and it was a little sideway you could go. I mean, there were houses building out there, and so we would go back and forth that way. You're up, and then all of a sudden you go really far down, and then you come back up on the other side. We had been to the movie, or I was in the 11th grade or 12th grade, because that's when I was going with.
So you were 17 or 18 years old?
Yes. He had a gold Camaro, which was a big deal at the time. He was a year older than me, so it could have been when I was a senior, I'm not sure, but he had the gold Camaro.
You were either a junior or senior in high school.
Mm-hmm.
What year did you graduate from high school?
69. We were coming back and we were going down the hill, and so all of a sudden there was this bright light that just appeared. You know how, like, if you get just right and the sun gets in your face and you can't hardly drive?
Yeah.
Well, this was at night. This was at night, and it was this really bright light, and I can remember that we just pulled over because he couldn't see. We were driving. And so we were talking about it, and I can't say that I touched something and it was hot, but I remember we were trying to not touch anything because we thought we were burn up. It was so bright. And so we watched this thing, it was over us before we really knew what was happening.
So it came
covered
closer
us.
to you?
Yes, it was completely over us. And so we're sitting there scared to death, and the car quit. He didn't cut it off, it just stopped, completely stopped. I can remember I was scared to open the door. I was scared to touch the car because I thought it was hot. Now, I don't know that it was,
right,
but I just remember thinking it was hot. We just sit there a while trying to figure what was going on. They're just checking us out. We could see the light and everything, but I couldn't really see the shape of it because it was right over us. I did notice it coming in on us. It's just all of a sudden it was there and we pulled over. But now after we sit there a while, it decided to leave. Nobody spoke to me or anything like that now. But it started backing off. And you could tell it was going. And so when it got away from the car and not right over the car, I could tell it was more of a cigar shape instead of a disc. But it went off up into the sky, and then all of a sudden, it was gone.
So you're driving and you kind of go down into like
a valley. It was a pretty big valley.
Right.
You know, I know exactly where the road is now. It's houses everywhere. There wasn't houses everywhere then. It was a new road and they were building houses there. We were in the valley. We were at the bottom when
you saw it.
We pulled over. I mean, it came over. And I didn't see it. No, that's
you
not
didn't
the
see
way I saw it.
It just appeared.
No, it was like over my head. It wasn't at my face. It was just blinding light coming down around us. And then we pulled over, but the car just stopped. You know, the thought was, how are we going to get out of here? You know, but I was scared to touch the door, which we really shouldn't have got out anyway. If it was the boogeyman, he'd get us. So anyway. But anyway, the weirdest thing was, I mean, it was just like they were checking us out, really. And so then when it started moving away, now you can see the windshield of the car. When it started moving away, then I could tell the shape of what it was. And it wasn't a disc. It was...
So look, like basically, you know, you may or may not be an artist, like what was the shape of it? I don't know.
Kind of like a turd. Right, so like we're down here in the thing and this is our windshield. And so as it moves away, you can see it up there. And then when it got up there, and it was bright, but it wasn't as bright. It's like as it moved, we were no longer the focus. We were the focus for a while. I felt like we were the focus.
Do you know how long it was? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea. It probably wasn't long, but it felt like long. To us, to me, it felt like long.
Oh, when you're scared,
Why did you think the car would have been hot unless the temperature felt hotter when it came?
I don't
in the air.
I just remember the blinding light. The blinding light. I have decided over the years that back when I used to think about it, I don't think about it anymore, but I thought it was just so bright that I thought, you know, we were gonna burn up or something. But then when it got up and it got where I could actually see it, you know, it wasn't as bright up in the sky like that, you know.
So
we were no longer the blinding force. It was moving away, and then it just blinked and it was gone.
What color was it? Was it like
really white here and it a yellowish.
It was a white light over you.
Really white, bright.
It sounds like you're possibly describing something that projected light specifically on you.
Yes, that's what
like
I
it
felt.
Shine light on you.
Yes, that's what I mean. Now I will tell you that over the years I've talked about it to several people, and even then we talked about it, and kids talked about it at school. We all talked about it and everything. I can remember talking to one time about it, and this is my cousin who's a pilot, a decorated pilot.
Yeah.
And anyway, he said that there were a lot of, things that had not been explained. Now, he was in Vietnam. Where else was he? Korea.
There have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
He was trained, credible.
Yes.
Yes, and he said there were a lot of things that a lot of pilots could not explain. He said at the time that that this happened to me, that they were experimenting Meridian Air Force.
Right.
Is it Naval Base?
Naval
It's a
Station.
naval
Yep.
station. Was out there, and he said that they were experimenting all kind of things that we didn't know about back then. Now probably that stealth plane.
Yeah, except that it doesn't sound like a stealth
and
plane.
down, up and down with just
Some type of hovercraft.
yeah, but I know he said, it could have been something like that. That makes me kind of feel a little bit better because maybe that's what, but they were focusing on me. That whatever it was right on me, I can't remember it before. I can't remember it until it was
Just appeared in an instant.
Yeah, he just told me that there were things that were being developed.
Yeah.
And they were testing, that was a testing place. And he said, so you could very well have seen something that they're making.
Odd that they would check you. Because it's not like a regular car.
Scary you to death. He just tried to explain it away to me, kind of.
I do reassurance because you were young and scary. It's a scary experience too.
Did it make any sound?
Don't remember any sound.
You don't remember any sound. The best that you remember then, it was silent.
Best I remember.
Yeah.
No engine sound or anything.
Don't remember that if it was.
When you say it was kind of this cigar shape,
Yeah.
and you say you could see as it got further away from you, it was yellowish light.
It got to be a yellow color,
But-
it had been so white.
Was it just a light, or could you see like some sort of hard surface, kind of
No, I
outline,
couldn't see a hard
metallic,
surface. It was
anything?
a light.
It was just illuminated object, pure light. It looked like.
Pure light is what it looked like.
Yeah.
When it went away, it was like that. It looked like it was moving slow, but it had to be moving fast because it went far away.
When you say it
up
was,
in the sky before it went away.
how close do you think it got to you? Your best guess. Are we talking about like a football field length away? Or would
No,
you
it
say
was closer than that.
within
I think,
500
right
feet?
over us. How long is a football field?
300 feet.
300 feet? Would you say it was
That high?
that high above your car?
It's hard to tell because it was right over me. I couldn't see it. I didn't really see it till it was gone. So I really don't know.
It was just a light,
It was just a light.
bright light.
White
White
bright
light. And you feel like whatever that thing was, the white light was something that actually shined out over you, on you. And it stopped doing that. And then when it got away, the actual thing itself was more of a yellow color.
Yeah, it was.
And then when you first could make out a form or sense that it was moving away from you through your windshield, how far would you say it was away from you?
I would think it was like a football field or closer even. I'm telling you, that dude was looking at me. I was looking at him, but first he was looking at me.
But you didn't see any bite.
Did you see
I'm telling you I didn't, but that dude was
Right.
looking at me.
Okay.
I was in the spotlight.
Yeah, you felt like that thing and whatever was,
Was
operating
making
it
a
was looking
contact
at
with
you.
me.
Yeah. Did you tell a lot of people after that?
Yeah, we talked about it at school a lot. Nobody else had anything else to say like that.
Like-
So I was kind of crazy.
So everybody you told just kind of either was bewildered by it or either
Yeah,
they thought you were exaggerating.
Yeah.
Did anything weird happen before you saw that? I mean, in the weeks, months, or after that? Or any kind of
But I can remember.
side effects that you remember?
Don't remember anything.
Anything? Dreams about it? You know,
Well, I did have some dreams about it now.
afterward?
Yeah.
What kind of dreams? Just seeing the object again?
Yeah, and in the dream, it's like they were going to take me away and I'd never get to come home.
Oh, that's scary. They have like these experiences. Some people get really like in a very dark place and get depression and all these kind of things because they fear of them coming back or this experience kind of messed them up.
This was the thing I remember out of my whole. I don't remember a lot. I'll tell you, I have a really bad memory, but that was something that happened that you don't go away. Everything was still there and quiet. Wasn't any noise. It was just light, bright light. It was over your head, right straight over your head, and then it moved up, and it's a big thing, and it moves up like this. Slowly. This was not fast. And then all of a sudden it's just woof. It was like a lightning bug. It went on, and you could, by the time it got over there, it was like a lightning bug. It was just a little
tiny.
Yeah.
Yonder come a Miss Rosie, how in the world do you know? Well, I know about an apron and a dress she wore, piece of paper in her hand. Let the midnight special shine a light on me. Let the midnight special shine a heavy loving light on me. When you get up in the morning, when that big bell rings, you go to march to the table, be the same damn thing, never said a thing about it. Have a trouble with the man,
Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Tacker was formerly the chief spokesman for the Air Force on the matter. There's nothing to hide.
There's nothing to hide at all.
never said a thing about it. Have a trouble with the man, let the midnight special shine a light on me.
Above us and around us, and you couldn't see it. It's just light. Then it kind of went up, like the corner of the thing right here, and it would be like that big, you know.
About that big in your window?
Yeah, in the window, and then it just. Zoop.
So it was about that big in the window?
Yeah, in the window. It was pretty big.
That's about a foot at least.
It might be 50 feet or 100 feet, or, you know.
Oh yeah, sure.
It wasn't no little bitty thing. Lifted up above us.
Just a luminous object shaped like a cigar. Right around the edges, was it clearly defined? Was it kind of fuzzy, or was it clearly defined?
It was clearly defined when it got out there. Then I talked about it when I got home, and everybody just kind of laughed at me, and so I didn't talk about it that much.
He said she teased you because she said you were parking with. It seems like everybody wanted to tease you about this.
That's why I think we just forgot about the whole thing. But we were going down the road. We were not parked. But we stopped, whether we wanted to or not.
Right.
We stopped right in the middle of the road.
Because the thing cut off your engine.
Yeah, it just cut us off. When the lights started coming, we were looking, and it's like everything was bright, and like it was like you were scared to touch it. I didn't know if it was going to be hot or what. And the car cut off, the radio cut off.
Everything was
the
dead.
battery, everything was dead. I have no idea how long they examined us. Is what I feel like was happening.
The Margie Briggs case. The Margie Briggs case. The second kind of strange.
There's no doubt about it. This is weird.
Circa 1967 to 1969.
In your lifetime, the days ahead of you, you're going to have to completely rebuild this country.
Well, you fellows are young enough to be going to Mars.
Meridian, Mississippi. At night. Close encounter of the second kind. Distance from the unidentified. Approximately equal to or less than 300 feet. Apparently less than. Physical effects in association with visual of the unidentified. Transient electromagnetic EM effects, that is, simultaneous and complete failure of automobile's radio and engine. Witnesses able to restart engine and resume full operation of automobile after departure of the unidentified. Any serious investigation of this case must take into account the following. The Margie Briggs case involves multiple witnesses, that is, 2 known eyewitnesses. Witness number 1, Margie Briggs, and witness number 2, her boyfriend at the time. Though his identity is well established and documented in the actual case file, here he will be referred to simply as witness number 2 out of respect for his personal privacy. Following the lengthy initial interview of Margie on camera in her home on September 12, 2020, with her help I was able to locate witness number 2 via social media. She then initiated communication with him through private messaging via that same social media app. They briefly discussed the incident after 50 years of no communication between them. Soon after their conversation, while I was again with her face-to-face in her home, Margie showed me those private messages on her cell phone in which witness number 2 corroborates the fact that they both witnessed the event in question. Witness number 2 confirmed to Margie that he remembers the light and told her to make of it whatever she will. The fact that witness number 2 immediately asserted that he remembers a specific light he and Margie saw one evening 50 years ago, after 50 years of silence between the 2 witnesses, clearly indicates the unusual and memorable nature of the incident at the least. He was short on the matter, though he readily affirmed the reality that they indeed observed something strange on the road that night. I've interviewed Margie's sisters, her husband and children, her sisters-in-law and brothers-in-law, other family members and those who know her well, asking them individually what Margie has said to them about the incident over time. In doing so, I used open-ended questioning to avoid leading or suggesting. Taken all together, their recollections are consistent with her account as presented in this documentary. As I have now interviewed her repeatedly on various occasions, I can confirm that no element of her account is contradicted by anything she has said in my presence to this day, beginning with my earliest and only childhood memory of her discussing the incident with me in full. By all indications, then, it appears that her account has remained fundamentally consistent and remarkably stable. I can also confirm without any reservation that I, along with Margie's entire family and community, know her to be sincere, honest, and straightforward, reliable and dependable, a stable and reputable citizen, a credible person. She tells only one story of this kind, and claims to have never seen such a thing before or after this singular event. She never made an official report, something she now regrets. She never sought any publicity, indeed quite the opposite. She has rarely talked about it to anyone. In high school, Margie was a member of the student council and school social club and a revelette, member of her high school dance team. She was also a member of her college dance team, a lionette. Not a young person lacking recognition. She has been married for over 50 years and is a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother. She is also a committed, active, and long-time member of her local church, having served there in youth ministry. For years, she worked at the Palmer Home for Children thrift store. It is interesting to note here that while Margie is sincere and committed in her Christian faith and practice, she does not express an explicitly religious interpretation. She does not interpret it as being divine, angelic, or demonic. Her own impression of the thing observed has always been that it has no evident conventional explanation and by all appearances was a non-human advanced aerial technology from an unknown point of origin. To this day, Margie's sisters remember witness number 2 fondly as someone who was well thought of and well liked in their household, mild-mannered and easygoing, a regular at their home. Margie's sister stated that witness number 2 confirmed Margie's story at the time, and both Margie and witness number 2 absolutely believed they had seen something unusual. By all appearances,
Witness number 2 is a stable and reliable family man, having held a responsible position of professional leadership until retirement.
I feel like it wasn't a normal thing. It wasn't I feel like it was something. E.T. might have been in there. I don't know.
And I talked about it when I got home, and everybody just kind of laughed at me, and so I didn't talk about it that much.
Though it would not be justified, still, some may proceed to simply dismiss out of hand a report of this nature. Perhaps assuming that, after all, it's just the experience of 2 young and susceptible teenage students traveling through the woods at night on a dark and lonely road. And besides, whatever might or might not have been 50 plus years ago, there's no real hard evidence here. While that response would certainly be understandable, it's also the easy way out. We should not evaluate this case in isolation, ignoring the larger patterns that emerge from an expansive body of similar independent reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, more popularly known as unidentified flying objects, UFOs. By analogy, my former professor, Dr. Ben Witherington III, a recognized New Testament scholar, has often said,
"A text without a context is just a pretext for whatever you want it to mean." Sometimes people ask me, why do I need to know all this extra stuff? Bible background stuff, foreground stuff, history, or this, that, and the other. Well, the chief reason, of course, is that words only have meaning in a certain kind of context. Take, for example, the word ROW. In one sentence, the word ROW could mean a row of seats. In another context, the word ROW could refer to an activity, a verb. Row, row, row your boat. And in England, a yet third context could be where the word ROW refers to a row, an argument, a kerfuffle of some kind. Words do not have meaning in isolation. They only have meaning in context.
And so too it is with reports of UAP or UFOs. First, consider carefully some context regarding the history of UFOs over Mississippi and beyond. Approximately a decade before Margie Briggs and witness number 2 experienced whatever they experienced in that lonely valley in Meridian, the crew of a U.S. Air Force RB-47 jet reconnaissance aircraft on an electronic warfare training flight over Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas reported a now historic radar visual incident in the pre-dawn hours of July 17, 1957. First detecting an evidently airborne radar source in the vicinity of Gulfport, Mississippi, using then state-of-the-art onboard electronic intelligence equipment, or ELINT. This mysterious radar source initially appeared at the right rear of the jet, before then moving up scope and circling in front of the RB-47 and over to its left rear. The crew was flying northward over Mississippi from the Gulf of Mexico as it approached a predetermined westward turn at Meridian, Mississippi. The late Dr. James E. McDonald, well-known American physicist and former professor at the University of Arizona's Institute of Atmospheric Physics, provides the following summary of this case in an article published in Astronautics and Aeronautics, July 1971. An Air Force RB-47, equipped with electronic countermeasures ECM gear and manned by 6 officers, was followed by an unidentified object for a distance of well over 700 miles and for a time period of 1.5 hours as it flew from Mississippi through Louisiana and Texas and into Oklahoma. The object was at various times seen visually by the cockpit crew as an intensely luminous light, followed by ground radar and detected on ECM monitoring gear aboard the RB-47. Of special interest in this case are several instances of simultaneous appearances and disappearances on all three of those physically distinct channels, and rapidity of maneuvers beyond the prior experience of the aircrew. Here it is worth pausing to note the following statements made by Dr. McDonald while on camera for an Australian Broadcasting Corporation television program, ironically recorded in July of 1967.
In Australia at the moment is Professor James McDonald, Professor of Meteorology at the University of Arizona. Officially, he was working for the US Navy, but in his spare time he's checking many Australian reports of UFOs and comparing them with American reports. His aim is to see if the reports tally. In short, whether UFOs constitute a global phenomenon. In Melbourne, he's talking with Brian King.
Professor McDonald, you have been highly critical of your own government's attitude towards UFOs.
Indeed, I have, yes. I've taken a very good look at the American official investigation program, Project Blue Book, run by the Air Force, and I have quite unequivocally described it to scientific colleagues back in the States as superficial and incompetent.
You have been as far as the United Nations with this problem.
Yes. On the 7th of June, nearly a month ago now, I spoke to the Outer Space Affairs Group in the United Nations, urging immediate UN action on this problem. It seems to me that the UN is one of the best places to tackle the international, the global aspects of the UFO problem, and all evidence now points to its being a truly global phenomenon.
Lieutenant made a statement at the time.
I didn't get to see you, Tant. That was a busy day, June 7th. In fact, I had a date to see him at 4 o'clock, and if there was any 1 hour that was the peak of the Mideast crisis, 4 o'clock was it. So I unfortunately didn't get to see you, Tant. But quite recently, a few days ago, I got a phone call from San Francisco pointing out that he had made a statement to Drew Pearson, an American columnist, that aside from the Vietnamese War, the UFO problem is the greatest international problem. And I sent him a wire strongly endorsing his position, but disagreeing with him to the extent of saying that I believe it's the most important international problem.
Why?
We have in the UFO problem a very strange situation. Here for 20 years plus, essentially similar phenomena have been reported all over the world, large numbers in the U.S., officialdom ignoring them, Air Forces ignoring them, and yet apparently a steady increase in the numbers of reliable reports from people in all walks of life seeing these objects that are not products of our technology, that are not meteorological astronomical phenomena, hovering at low altitude, increasing numbers in urban areas, and collectively we don't know what's going on. That's an extremely unwise situation, no matter how you view it. We do not know what is involved in this problem, but in general, to have this possibility that the world is under something resembling reconnaissance, possibly from some extraterrestrial source, and to go on about our petty ways collectively doesn't seem to me to be a wise situation. So I'm trying to get scientists and governmental agencies to take a look at this at a highly accelerated pace.
Back to the RB-47 case of 1957. Mr. Brad Sparks, an aerospace researcher and UFO investigator, argues for the following conclusion in his extensive research published in the UFO Encyclopedia, The Phenomenon from the Beginning, 2nd edition, 1998. This case certainly ranks as the best documented unexplained UFO incident in history, and it holds the potential for further revealing disclosures if records of a highly classified investigation can be found and released. All of the UFO observations by multiple visual observers, multiple ELINT receivers, and multiple radar sets, as well as the serendipitous calibrations of the UFO signals against the separately identifiable Duncanville radar signals, provide a unique, tight, interlocking web of intricately fitted evidence. This mass of strikingly self-consistent data demonstrates the existence of a large, metallic, rapidly maneuvering airborne source of powerful S-band radar-like signals and visible light, a UFO, that played tag with an Air Force intelligence gathering jet for more than 2 hours on the night of July 17, 1957, across 4 states in the southern United States. This evidence does not prove what UFOs are or where they come from, but mimicry of an air defense radar is a technological effect hardly compatible with, say, a non-sentient natural plasma.
Why is it so important? Radio or radar signals have been detected and recorded from a UFO, not just are using radars to bounce signals off a UFO. We're actually detecting something that the UFO seems to be sending out.
In his book titled The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, 1972. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, astronomical consultant to the U.S. Air Force, who will be referenced in greater detail shortly, states the following about this case that began over Mississippi. The case already referred to, involving an RB-47 and described in full in Astronautics and Aeronautics, July 1971, is certainly one that must be considered seriously as illustrating an unquestionably strange phenomenon. To the point,
Sonny boy!
it is naive and uninformed to assume that the scenario of two teenagers encountering a true, unidentified flying object over Meridian, Mississippi in the late 60s could be nothing more than science fiction, simultaneous hallucination, or otherwise youthful misperception or misidentification. As we have just seen with the historic RB-47 case, at least one true UFO already flew over Mississippi 10 years prior.
Professor McDonald, what have you found here that's been of use to you?
I've investigated about 50 or 60 cases since I came down to New Zealand and Australia. Extremely interesting UFO sightings. A lot of help from local investigatory groups in Sydney and Melbourne, and have found as I go through these that the type of sightings are essentially similar to those in the United States.
What are the main similarities?
Persons of really quite high credibility reporting unconventional objects, discs, cigar-shaped objects, frequently at very low elevation, hovering over sometimes urban areas, sometimes over cars, following cars, sometimes over cars, following cars. Same kind of public reaction, quite a strong similarity to the American reluctance to report them to official channels because of fear of ridicule, but behind it all, a very large number, a very surprisingly large number of these sightings of quite unconventional objects maneuvering in our airspace.
And you can see the windshield of the car when it started moving away, then I could tell the shape.
The United States Air Force investigation of UFOs officially began in 1948, first known as Project Sign, then Project Grudge, and finally became Project Blue Book.
They were strongly guided by the CIA. Play it down. Cool.
The Air Force officially investigated 12,618 reported sightings. Of those, 701 remain officially designated as unidentified. Due to the history and the nature of the projects, these well-publicized statistics are only rough figures. Nevertheless, among the later of the unknowns is a reported sighting that occurred on July 10th, 1967, just south of Lazelia, Mississippi, on the northern outskirts of Meridian. Only some 5 miles away by road from the site of the Margie Briggs incident. According to Blue Book documents, one Harold Washington, a 44-year-old resident of Meridian, Mississippi, and NAAS Meridian golf professional, that is Naval Auxiliary Air Station Meridian, a retired captain of the U.S. Marine Corps, was driving on Old Poplar Springs Drive in a light sprinkling rain at approximately 5:50 p.m. in daylight, when suddenly his car lost electrical power. The engine stopped. The radio, which had been playing, went silent.
The car cut off, the radio cut off.
He steered his car to the right shoulder of the road and coasted to a stop.
Everything was dead.
Washington exited his vehicle to explore why the car had cut off.
Trying to figure what was going
After
on.
only a few steps, he suddenly heard a swishing noise approaching. He looked up and saw an object of excessive size, as he described it, bigger than my house, angling toward the ground at apparently a high rate of speed. His first impression was that the object was crashing as it passed to his front, from right to left at an estimated 200 to 300 feet in the air. However, just before reaching a growth of pine trees, it tilted upward, appeared to move to the immediate right, and then accelerated rapidly at an angle almost straight up and disappeared into the clouds.
Just woof.
Washington then noticed that a herd of black Angus cattle in the pasture to the right of his car was spooked, and the cows were running away from the edge of the road toward the center of the field. He was severely frightened.
Scared you to death. Yeah, it scared you to death. I feel like it wasn't a normal thing.
Mr. Washington described the object as resembling the cymbal attached to a drum set from a side view as it first passed overhead. It was dirty metallic gray in color on its underside, and when it reached the tree line and tilted upward, the top of the object became more visible and was the deep metallic color of the bluing in a gun. He saw no portholes, hatches, openings, or protrusions, and no exhaust. And the object seemed to move silently, with no engine sounds or noises of any kind being emitted from the object itself. The only sounds he heard were those made by the object in pushing away a volume of air.
Don't remember any sound.
The last that you remember then, it was silent.
Best I remember.
No engine sound or anything.
Don't remember that if it was. Everything was still there. Quiet. Wasn't any noise. Then after they checked us out, they just...
Washington stated, "Its flight resembled nothing I have ever witnessed before, unless it be likened to the sharp darting movement of a hummingbird." He estimated that he viewed the object for 3 to 5 seconds. After it disappeared, his car radio suddenly started playing again.
I could tell by her apron if I'd a clothes she wore, an umbrella on her shoulder. She got a peeper in her hand, left a midnight special, shine a light on me.
He was able to start his engine and drove directly home.
The car framed.
Did y'all hastily go home?
Mr. Washington's wife stated that he was completely sober and very frightened by the incident. She said there was no doubt that he was serious, and she was positive that he had definitely seen something extremely unusual and upsetting.
Then I talked about it when I got home, and everybody just kind of laughed at me, and so I didn't talk about it that much.
It should be noted that after first speaking with his family, Mr. Washington then promptly reported his encounter to Naval Intelligence within approximately 35 minutes of the incident, but with the request that news media not be informed. The closing portion of Mr. Washington's written statement is worth reading here in full. "I certify that all statements set forth herein are as I witnessed them, with no exaggeration or opinions on my part. I intend to give this statement to Mr. of the Naval Intelligence, and in the event no facts can be uncovered to verify or corroborate my sighting, I will refuse to discuss this incident further, having no wish for any publicity, notoriety, etc. from this sighting. It is my belief, however, that someone in U.S. government should know of this."
The Air Force changed its public position.
They were strongly guided by the CIA. They handed down the dictum, which then became sort of the unwritten law of the Air Force: don't rock the boat, play it down, cool it, don't get the public excited. And I know, having been in Blue Book for nearly 20 years, that whenever an interesting case came up, the very last thing in the world they would do is to notify the media. And when the media themselves found out something, the Air Force did its best to play it down. It's called it a balloon, called it a star, called it balloons, meteors, satellites, aircraft seen with the sun glinting off of them, and birds.
I emphasize in conclusion that I cannot prove in a court of law that marsh gas is the full explanation of these sightings, but it does appear to me extremely likely.
A common theory, swamp gases. Is that a significant explanation for a certain percentage?
No,
it is not.
No, it isn't. That was a very...
And we've been told that it is by some so-called, authorities.
Well, this was a... You've got me on the spot there, because I was the one who perpetrated that thing.
You're kidding me.
Way back in Hillsdale, Michigan.
Yes.
I, at that time, simply said that since the lights were seen over a swamp, I said, well, one possible explanation was that this could be swamp gas. But the reporters underlined swamp gas and ran off to the telephones. Yeah. And I think any time after that, if
if a UFO had been seen in the Sahara Desert, it would have been called swamp gas, you see.
In 1948, the Air Force asked me, as an astronomer, to assist them in seeing how many of the reports on flying saucers that were coming in at that time could be explained astronomically. And one thing led to another, and I became scientific consultant to the Air Force and remained so for some 20 years. I started almost as a complete skeptic because I thought the whole thing was a question of post-war nerves, but it was the persistence of the phenomenon, it refused to dry up and blow away, that finally led me to the belief that we had a real phenomenon to deal with.
The famed Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer, professor, and pioneer in the scientific study of UFOs. Served as Associate Director of the Optical Tracking Program at the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, playing an integral role in the international effort to track the first artificial satellites in orbit. He was later chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University and eventually founded the Center for UFO Studies in 1973 to promote the continuing of serious scientific analysis of the UFO phenomenon. As stated, he served as a scientific consultant to the U.S. Air Force for Project Blue Book until 1969, and in this capacity, Dr. Hynek evaluated Harold Washington's 1967 UFO experience in the Meridian area as follows. In summary, case should be carried as unidentified, single witness, since we have no evidence that this person was mentally unbalanced. Dr. Hynek found the Washington case intriguing, deeming it one that serves as a very good example for discussion, and recommending that it or similar cases be studied in greater depth by the Air Force, entirely for scientific purposes and without any fanfare whatever. Commenting on the extraordinary flight characteristics of the object as described by Mr. Washington, and acknowledging such as being characteristic of other enigmatic aerial objects reported by others.
Mary 10.
Dr. Hynek insisted, in our present scientific framework, of course, this is utterly impossible. Our technology knows of no way of accomplishing this soundlessly, or even of accomplishing it. We have to face the fact that we do not know what causes this class of phenomenon reported so widely from this and other countries in the past many years. Furthermore, Dr. Hynek observed, this happened to be a daytime sighting, and the report, taken at face value, states simply that, apropos of nothing at all, the witness's car suddenly coasted to a stop and the radio went silent. And thus we have the familiar EM effect, that is, electromagnetic interference. As it happened in so many other cases, the witness gets out of the car in an attempt to find out the cause of the trouble when he sights, almost always at quite close range, a silently moving and generally large luminous object, luminous at night. Likewise, characteristic of this type of report, witness states that when object disappeared, the radio came back on, and he was able to start engine again. Recognizing Mr. Washington as being an ostensibly stable, reliable person of good repute in the community, and facing the fact that Project Blue Book had no evidence that Mr. Washington was unbalanced, that is, by all appearances having a highly credible witness, Dr. Hynek emphasized, if it were not for the car stoppage and the animal effect, it would seem logical to ascribe this to a hallucination on the part of the single witness. Dr. Hynek was not aware of the Margie Briggs case because it was never officially reported. The Harold Washington case and the Margie Briggs case bear striking similarities that are rather remarkable. Even though Margie was completely unaware of the Harold Washington case until 53 years after the fact, when I was searching online for possible reports of UFO sightings in the Meridian area and stumbled across it. In both cases, the cars suddenly, surprisingly, and completely lost power.
We're stopped.
Just prior to witnesses observing a large unidentified object or phenomenon in the near proximity in the sky. Said objects or phenomena were observed in front of the witnesses at roughly the same low altitude. They seemed to move silently and with no discernible means of propulsion. Both performed unusual characteristics such as hovering and then ascending slowly, or stopping abruptly in a descent and then performing an immediate right-angle turn, all before suddenly accelerating and departing rapidly in yet a different direction, disappearing from view like a lightning bug at varying degrees of vertical trajectory. After departing from view on the distant horizon or nearly straight up into the clouds, witnesses were then able to restart their car engines and resume normal operation of their vehicles. In both cases, there were no additional witnesses ascertained beyond the passengers of the two vehicles, as both incidents occurred on lonely roads. Witnesses were frightened by the experience and immediately went home and informed family. Concerning the shape of these unidentified aerial objects or phenomena, it is plausible that a drum cymbal-like object viewed from the side in daylight might appear as an elongated cigar-like object when viewed from the side at night and luminous. As Dr. Hynek noted, they are generally reported as luminous at night. Regardless, next to the mutual feature of sudden car stoppage, such close physical proximity between the two sites is startling. I personally drove between them 3 different times to calculate the distance on my odometer, averaging 4.93 miles. Obviously, as the crow flies, this may as well be on the same branch of a tree for things that possess the performance capabilities reported. Regarding time, these two incidents occurred between 1 and 22 months apart, quite near to one another temporally at either end of the range. Finally, what is the compound probability that these two completely independent reports are, by sheer coincidence, both the result of dramatically parallel hallucinations or misperceptions, each occurring geographically within 5 miles and less than 2 years of the other? At the maximum. Before I initiated this investigation into Margie's experience, she was not very familiar with UFO history and lore, or the many documented cases of close encounters of the second kind, and their various physical effects, including the known prominent electromagnetic effect of these strange things stopping cars.
Cigar-shaped objects, frequently at very low elevation, hovering, sometimes over cars, following cars.
The stars at night are big and bright, deep in the heart of Texas. The prairie sky is wide and high, deep in the heart of Texas. The coyotes wail along the trail.
Folks in Level Land, Texas are worried about strange objects in their neighborhood. Sheriff Weir Clem says he has received several reports of a strange egg-shaped object about 200 feet long landing on farms and highways last night in the vicinity of Level Land. Sheriff Clem says he even himself got a glimpse of the thing, which somehow turned off lights and auto engines when it came near. The sheriff says that lights and engines worked fine again after the thing went away. This is Bob Pierpoint in Washington.
The object was in the road when he drove up, and as he approached the object, the closer he got to it, when he got so close, it seems though his car stalled him. His motor died, and when the object began to move upward, his lights went out.
In other words, the two independent reports were approximately the same at around the same time in the evening.
Yes.
Well, sir, it was a flying object. It was oval-shaped. To me, it looked flat on the bottom. It was something I'd never seen before. My car did quit running on the highway. Coming back from Lubbock is what caused me to notice it.
Did you actually see the object itself?
Yes, sir, I did.
And could you give us approximately the size of the thing, or was it massive, or was it just a light, or what happened exactly?
Well, no, sir, it looked solid.
And about how long
did
it stay where you were?
Shape was,
3, 4
egg shape, flat on the bottom.
When it took off, did it also travel straight up? Well, almost straight up, and at very high speed, yes.
The way that light was, to me, I mean, I know there was something there, you know, it was something behind that light.
The calls that came into the police department that night described a
that
similar
light
event
was.
witnessed by motorists in Hockley County.
I wanted to know, see what was it.
What makes this case so unique and believable is that this was witnessed by multiple people in different parts of Hockley County in nearly a 3-hour period. One of those witnesses was 30-year-old Pedro Saucedo. He was driving 4 miles west down this road near Levelland, accompanied by his friend Joe Salas. He's only spoken on camera one time, but he still remembers it many years later.
I hit the ground, man. I said, hey,
Something's going on here.
So, you know, I hit the ground, you know. Because after he got almost top of the truck, that's when our truck started shaking, you know. And a lot of, like a hard rumbling, you know, wind.
He says a large bright object hovered above the road in front of him, causing his engine and lights to shut off.
The light went out more bad. I pulled off the road. And I got in front of the truck, you know, looking to the object, you know. It was a big, bright light. I mean, you can hardly stand it by looking at it. When I hit the ground, and that thing was already going off, past my truck, there was a lot of heat, you know. I felt the heat. And I got scared then, and I said, I wonder what the heck it is.
Saucedo says when the object left, he looked over at his friend Joe, who appeared to be in shock.
He was sitting up there with big eyes, man. Man, he was standing up there, hey, Joe, what's the matter with you? Wake up, man. And all of a sudden, you know, he came to, you know. And the first thing he says, what was it, Pete? What was it? It's too hot.
And there were 6 other witnesses who reported a similar experience that night.
I got on the phone. I had the phone from the sheriff's office. I told him what happened. And he didn't. It seemed to me like he didn't believe it or something, you know what I mean? He said, certainly, maybe you might not believe me, but I'm telling you exactly what I saw.
Levelland police reported a total of 15 phone calls directly related to the bright object that night. Even Hockley County Sheriff Weir Clem says
I did not see the object. I think it's lying.
about 300 yards ahead of him when he went out to investigate just northwest of Levelland.
Mr. McDonald, a professor of atmospheric physics at the University of Arizona. Sir, you said a moment ago that the subject requires considerable examination, rectification.
My field is atmospheric physics, and a lot of the official explanations have centered around atmospheric physical phenomena, optical effects, and so on. Let me take one case. This is now almost 10 years ago, a rather important case. Probably many listeners will remember when it was headline news. It occurred in Levelland, Texas, the night of November 2nd and the morning of the 3rd, 1957. It involved some very interesting phenomena. I've interviewed some of the people who were involved in it. Levelland, Texas, a small town, highways running in and out of Levelland. From about 11 o'clock at night on the 2nd till around 1 in the morning on the 3rd, a series of about 10 independent sightings by 10 persons. A couple of them were law enforcement officers, others were just drivers. In every one of these instances, the interesting thing that happened was that the driver of the vehicle suddenly came upon a very large, and when I say large, the reported sizes were of the order of 100 to 200 feet diameter. 100 to 200 feet diameter, glowing.
It's worth pausing here to note the following parallel with respect to the size of the thing Margie Briggs observed. She stated that it was a big thing, appearing approximately 1 foot long as she observed it through the windshield from the front passenger seat while it hovered at a distance of approximately 300 feet from her eyes. Based on her description, my own experiment on a football field, and the calculations of my friend who is a longtime physics teacher, both confirm that the cigar-shaped thing Margie observed
up to approximately 150
feet long, longer than a Boeing 737 MAX 10.
Of the order of 100 to 200 feet diameter, glowing, hovering over fields or roads. The first effect on the vehicle
was interference with the lights, and then the ignition system failed. And these are spread over a 2-hour period, and each one of these numbers, here's 1, 7, they correspond to the names of the people, were instances in which cars were stopped and the lights went out. Now, as soon as the object took off, which is the characteristic pattern, some of the cars were stopped for 2 or 3 minutes, but then the objects rose from the ground, sometimes with enormous accelerations. Then the lights came back on without any manipulation of the ignition key, and the driver found he could immediately start his car. This was common to all of these cases. Now, the official explanation of this level in Texas case, based on the Air Force handling of the Project Blue Book investigation, was that this was ball lightning. That's what accounted supposedly for these 200-foot diameter objects, plus wet ignitions, and that was the official explanation of why the car stopped. Now, since we all know about the fact that cars, when they do get wet, don't usually start immediately, there's a bit of a problem there. But this is only secondary compared to what one finds when he looks, as I have, at the actual weather data for the case in question.
Excuse me, sir, before we get there. If it were ball lightning, is it normal to have ball lightning of that size? And would that ball lightning have the electromagnetic quality of stopping these engines?
Well, first of all, the typical size of ball lightning is a fairly rare phenomenon. Most of us have never seen it. I have never seen it, though that's very much in my field. A foot in diameter is a typical phenomenon. But the cases of ball lightning that are on record are strictly limited to extreme thunderstorm conditions where you have an energy source, high potential, high gradient. I am not aware of any case where a vehicle was stopped by ball lightning. I could not assert that it could not occur. Well, then this was the question. I discussed this problem with a colleague at Westinghouse who's expert in these problems. He said, well, maybe in the event of a really severe thunderstorm, you could scale up ball lightning to tens of feet. So I looked at the map, and I was quite startled as a person with meteorological training. Here's the map for the very time. This is 12 o'clock midnight, right in the middle of the level in Texas.
That's a weather map.
This is a weather map. Now, I'll point with my pencil to Levelland, Texas, which is in the Panhandle, and any of you who are familiar with meteorology will immediately be bothered by the fact that Levelland was being invaded by a large, high-pressure area pushing down over the Great Plains. The nearest front was down near San Angelo, hundreds of miles away. The nearest rain was about 100 miles away. The weather report for the nearest stations involved only scattered clouds. In the Levelland area, there were no stations at the time of the observation that even had any rain. 2 hours later, there was one station that had less than 1/100 of an inch. And here is the official explanation charging severe thunderstorms and wet ignition. Utterly senseless. And when I asked the people at Wright-Patterson, they really had no very good answer. And all I can say is that in cases of this sort, an ad hoc explanation is almost pulled out of the blue. I have just seen it in too many instances to be happy with this. There are many very definite things that could be done in a scientific context to pursue this problem, and it badly needs that kind of attention, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Professor McDonald.
They fit a definite pattern. Well, as a matter of fact, if I may throw modesty to the winds for just a moment, in my first book, The UFO Experience, I classified these into 6 classes, with the nocturnal lights, the daylight discs, and the radar cases, and then the 3 kinds of close encounters. That's where the term close encounters came from, as a matter of fact. Close encounters of the first kind, close encounters of the second kind, and close encounters of the third kind. Now, the close encounters of the first kind are close, but are characterized by the absence of any physical effects. They may frighten a person, give them bad dreams, but nothing else happens. Close encounters of the second kind are extremely important. They are the ones in which physical traces, burnt rings on the ground, broken tree branches, stopped cars, skin burns, nausea, eye burns, so forth. The things that can be studied actually in the hospital or in the laboratory. And then the close encounters of the third kind, those in which the entities, the creatures, are reported.
We couldn't explain most of it as hallucination, could we? Because there's too many physical evidences that are unexplainable.
Well, as a scientist, the ones that I've been studying are those that have physical evidence. For instance, the close encounters of the second kind that leave marks on the ground and stop cars and that sort of thing.
Stop cars?
Oh, yeah. There are hundreds of cases where all over the world, you see, if these things didn't fit patterns, if each case were different from the next one, then there's no way of studying it. But when you get reports from Australia, Japan, France, northern Canada,
That say in essence what?
that give you the same pattern, then you have to say, well, either there's a virus going around that's causing everybody to become crazy at the same time, or there's something to it. Now, of course, remember that we're still talking about the unidentified ones, not the great majority, which can have perfectly natural explanations. So we must take that out before.
Fact remains that truly puzzling cases, and I really mean puzzling, that stump the experts, and people who say those don't exist simply have not studied the subject, simply have not studied the subject.
Dr. Hynek's been studying UFOs for 30 years, first as an Air Force advisor, later on his own. His files contain unexplained sightings from 140 countries. Hynek doubts UFOs come from other planets because of the distances involved, or that they're secret government experiments.
It's just not done for a secret device to be tested in 140 countries. And also, I think if we had had such propulsion methods, it would have been immoral to send men to the moon using antiquated chemical fuels. At all costs, we got to study. We don't get any place if we don't study.
The statement that we are not alone, if true, and I think is true, does not necessarily explain the UFO. There are other possible theories like the time travel, or parallel reality,
We must always be aware of the fact that we may be testing the wrong hypothesis. I think we should also think of other possible hypotheses. Suppose there are such things as interlocking universes, where forms of matter which don't mesh with ours except under strange conditions. It's arrogant, egocentric, egotistical for us to think that we are the highest intelligences in the universe. I think that's completely preposterous.
A French scientist running around the United States investigating the UFO phenomenon.
You've been looking at this phenomenon for a long time. You've worked closely with Dr. Alan Hynek.
From my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Something from another dimension, space or time.
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space. Here are objects, I think we have to call them objects, that are physical, that interact with the environment, that cause effects on the witnesses, on the psychology and the physiology of the witnesses, and leave traces on the ground, appear to be capable of manipulating time and space in ways that go beyond what our physics understands to do.
In your books, particularly your most recent book, Messengers of Deception, which is many years old, you suggest that UFOs are deliberately trying to manipulate our subconscious mind to create a mythology in our culture about themselves. They're both physical and concrete, yet very elusive at the same time.
The level I was addressing in Messengers of Deception, which is a social level.
The impact on our culture.
Yes, and the impact on our belief systems. Could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings?
Possibly all of these levels going on simultaneously.
They are describing phenomena and objects that appear very often out of nowhere, disappear on the spot, objects that are changing shapes, objects that merge together. If the technology or the phenomenon can do that, what that tells me is that it is manipulating time and space dimensions in ways that are beyond our science. And if they can do that, they can be from anywhere, anytime. They don't have to be from a particular planet in outer space.
What do you make of the whole abduction hypothesis?
There we're going to the second level, which is the physiological and psychological level. First, there is no question in my mind that something has happened to those people. In other words, those are real occurrences. Those are not imaginary or purely psychological. It should be studied by scientists. We now see that there are many different hypotheses about it. It's not just that either it doesn't exist or it has to be extraterrestrial. There are many other hypotheses. And to me, the UFO phenomenon is, I don't have a solution.
They seem to have an element of the parapsychological in them. There's just no question that some of the reports seem to tell of the sort of thing that you find in poltergeist phenomena.
Whatever it was right on me, you know. I'm telling you, that dude was looking at me. I was looking at him, but first, he was looking at me. I was in the spotlight.
Whatever was operating
making
it was
contact
looking
with
at
me.
you. Yeah.
So, write that down.
Yonder come a Miss Rosie, how in the world do you know? Well, I know she's an April, and the dress she wore, umbrella on the shoulder, piece of paper in her hand. Well, I'm going and ask the governor, he's trying to lose my man, let the midnight special shine a light on me.
That light just came down over us, and it's almost like it was trying to put a spell on us or something. Is what I thought.
Put a spell on you? What do you?
Yes, I felt like when it was over us, like, I mean, it was a loss of control. We had no control. I felt like I had no control in what was happening.
What do you mean?
Because the car quit, the sound went off. We're sitting there looking at each other going, what is going on? I don't even remember us talking about it. I mean, it's almost like I was in a, I don't know, like that sound, like it was controlling me some way or something. I don't know.
This is Harold Camillo speaking to you from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department here in downtown Pascagoula, where this morning we had an interrogation or interview with two of these gentlemen that reportedly sighted and were taken aboard a UFO late last night in the Goche area.
They know more of what's going on down here on this earth than we think.
Dr. Heineck is called to the scene of every major UFO sighting. He was summoned to Pascagoula, Mississippi last October, hours after two shipyard workers, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, stumbled into a sheriff's office and said they had been taken aboard a flying saucer.
I went down to Pascagoula completely negative, but I worked with those men for quite a while. I listened to tapes that had been taken when they didn't know they were being taped. I saw how Charlie behaved under hypnosis, and finally the lie detector test. All of those things convinced me that he was not making it up. They had an experience, period. It's not an isolated case. We have a catalog now of well over 800 such cases. It fits a pattern. You see, that's not an isolated case. Stop cars and that sort of thing. Stop cars? Oh, yeah.
I have no idea how long they examined us, is what I feel like was happening.
If you don't ignore the cases, if you decide to go down that rabbit hole and acquaint yourself with these cases of sightings or encounters, well, I can tell you that's going to change your attitude.
You know, sometimes people say something, abducted me. I could see how that could happen. I don't think that happened, because we didn't get out of the car at all that I know of. But it was a no control thing.
Yeah.
You had no control. You just sit there. Then it moved up where you could see it perfectly.
And it wasn't moving fast then?
No. It was just moving.
So with your...
Like, look at me. Yes, I'm real. Look at me.
They keep grasping at that maybe it's an experimental craft, maybe it's something normal. Because it's hard to cope with in your mind. Felt that way kind of about it.
Yeah, I tried to rationalize away, but it never did rationalize out. It happened and it was real to me, and nobody else will ever understand it till it happens to them.